Howdy, and welcome back to the Dice Podcast and the most virile desk in Warhammer.
Yeah, that is true.
We've got some remodeling going on here at the House of Black.
Yeah, sir.
We wanted to lighten it up a little bit this time
Add some
around.
lights. Really brighten the place up.
It really is nice. It's going to be really nice when it's finished. We've got a nice backdrop here, but it's cool that you're making the updates.
Yeah, well, it was just a big wide open area into the laundry room before, so
Sure.
putting a wall up is always nice.
Yeah. And you won't notice on video, but as soon as Alex found out he was going to be a father of both a boy and a girl, he's sprouting gray hair.
It goes fast at that point.
I love it. Yeah, I love
it starts there, and all of a sudden you look like me in the month.
every time I get, like hit traffic or something happens, bing, 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 gray hair is coming out.
So we've got a bunch of new updates in Warhammer since we were here last. A bunch of new battle tomes. It seems like this is the fastest battle tome release schedule I can remember. There's every month we've got 2 battle tomes cranking out here for a while, and it's an exciting time, but it's tough to keep. Tough to keep up with it.
Yeah, and it almost seems like these last 4 months have now completely shifted the meta from where we even thought we were when the GHB released.
Absolutely.
So it's super exciting times. There's a bunch of armies that are being brought in that we're kind of like, we have a shooting army, we have an anti-magic army now, and it's like we're filling out the meta again.
Right, for sure. And some underperformers, historical underperformers, are starting to creep up on the win rates, and some things that have been dominant for years are starting to slide down.
Well, and some historic underperformers are historically underperforming.
Well, yeah, there's still some at the bottom that have been there for a while.
Yeah.
We did have a MetaWatch report that came out last week, or this week, early this week, with win rates for all of our favorite armies, and there were some surprises there for sure.
So my general reaction was, this feels like right overall. Like you, at the top, Disciples of Tzeentch and Lumineth. Now I guess I was just a little surprised by Tzeentch being the top army.
Sure.
It's super magic strong. Obviously, pinks are always going to be great, and getting all your spells off is awesome. That's kind of what Lumineth has got going on, but they also have the reach out and touch you factor.
Yeah.
Beast of Chaos is, I think, it's hard to say whether it's the old book or the new book that's resulting in being at the top. But then, what's number 4 now?
It gets.
Yes.
Yeah. Already.
Yeah.
And this MetaWatch really is, like you said, it's a mix of old book and new book, and the fact that Gitz has moved up as fast as it has is terrifying.
I mean, they deserved it a little bit, but
I don't know if they deserved as much as they got.
Yeah.
But they deserved a lot.
some stuff in the book is a little strong.
So I think everything in the book is a little strong, but it's going to be fun to see how it's rolled back a little bit, or how it's brought back. I think the immediate concern is probably Squigs.
Sure.
And then once they get to touching Squigs, then the next concern would be Trogs.
The book is built like Seraphon was when it came out.
Yeah.
Where as soon as you start peeling back the top layer, as soon as Salamanders got nerfed in that first wave, well, Seraphon hasn't gotten any weaker. It's just different things.
Yeah.
And it feels like that right now.
Although Seraphon has fallen a little bit.
Yes, it only took 3 years,
Yes.
but now Seraphon is starting to have a win rate less than they might want.
That's how
Alex's
you know.
comment to me was literally, when we met, the book had, our first game was the day the book dropped. And now it seems like we've known each other for a long time, and for that same long time, Seraphon has been awesome.
This is how you know the pandemic is ending, because Seraphon went below 50%.
Yeah, right?
Their tragically low win rate of 49%. It's over now.
Plus or minus 4.
Plus or minus 4. They might be at 53.
Yeah.
But we're seeing a huge fat middle from 54% to, I would say 46% is probably about as low as you want to go on that fat middle.
Right. But most of the factions are right in there. There's just a handful of outliers.
Yeah, and then we see a sprinkling of my favorite books on the bottom. I've been saying that.
Well, it's your favorite one book.
Yeah, I think Orc War Clans might need a little bit of a spruce up because you see Big Wa, Iron Jaws, and Cruel Boys all making up the bottom three. But I think Iron Jaws, if you play a lot of pigs, is still really good.
Right.
So, but I think it's time for Cruel Boys to find that love. It's probably a year away, I bet. But
yeah, it's a faction that they've had trouble finding balance for and making it strong, and they've done just massive point reductions. They've done some rule changes to help them out, and it doesn't get there. Right?
You always like to say you can fix broken stuff by increasing the points, but you can't.
You can fix stuff that's too strong.
Yeah.
By increasing points.
When I say broken, I mean
Yeah.
too strong. But you can't fix poor
Just-
performing stuff by making it cheap.
Right.
I mean, right now you could put a lot of stuff out on a Cruel Boys army that's gonna die in the
Right.
first.
And
turns.
we've had games like that where Cruel Boys comes to the table with just heaps of cheap stuff, and then gets outclassed, and them being able to bring more units to the table just means that they get outclassed for longer.
I'll talk about when we go into Austin's tournament a
Yeah.
little bit, my Cruel Boys matchup against the Lumineth, but it was kind of a how do you have this much stuff, and even after all my stuff was gone but one model, I was still able to clear most of the rest of it.
Do you guys ever want to see the point where the meta analysis gets down to specific subfactions? Or do you think we're just not enough to the point where we have enough results to get realistic numbers there?
Well, when we look at the Honest Wargamers stats, you can really do that. You can go sub-factions, you can look at even unit inclusions, and I think that's really, really useful. The problem that we see in a lot of cases is there's just not enough sample size for much of it, right? There's enough sample size at the aggregated level, and then there's enough sample size for the things that are frequently brought. But then as soon as you get to subfaction 2 or subfaction 3 in a lot of books, there's just not enough games played with them to mean anything.
I mean, that's a good indicator of how they would be in the meta if they're not being played at all.
Right. And then one other thing is the meta watch is obviously happening during one of the fastest output of books we've had in a long time. So, like, we are now seeing an anti-magic army. So we're seeing the top two armies, Disciples of Slaanesh, Lumineth, super magic heavy, magic
3 of the
doms.
top 4.
And Gloomspite is just shockingly strong in magic as well. And
you're talking about Khorne here, right?
Yeah,
Khorne
so
coming in as an anti-magic.
Khorne's flying in as anti-magic. You have KO, who probably barely got any results into this meta watch. They can start dealing with some of the stuff that's really small hero dependent, if that's how they choose to go.
Right.
So we're seeing something that can be shooting down. So this is in such flux, and I don't know if we'll ever get a period where we're like, oh, okay, we've been studying on armies or books for 4 months. What does the meta look like now? So,
I'm guessing we're going to see releases after this wave. I think we're going to see releases slow down a little bit. Now, we know that the most likely releases after this are going to be Soul Blight and OBR. They're going to be pretty soon.
Those are spring books, right?
Yes. And then in the summer, we expect, Seraphon for sure.
Yep.
We expect cities. But I think as we get past these next 2 death books, we'll probably see a little bit of a slowdown and a little bit of a breathing room for some of these things.
I think we need it.
Yeah.
I didn't buy my
It's a little dizzy.
book. Yeah.
Well, and we have books with like a hero that are coming out. The next books, the summer books, are supposed to be range refreshes for a lot of stuff.
At least for Seraphon. And we've already seen a bunch of that. There's going to be a bunch of Seraphon that comes out.
Well, and then the city stuff, aren't they going to... I can't remember what that's called.
Well, there's the Dawnbringers Crusade. We don't have a timeline on that yet. And looking at some of the things that they're putting out, these are kind of bit renders and things like that. That doesn't tell me that it's really close, but it might be, right? They might be just kind of slow rolling that into us. And then Flesh Eater Courts, rumored for the fall, rumored to be a pretty big range refresh.
Really?
We'll see if that comes out.
I haven't heard that at all.
I've heard that it's something like a Sylvaneth style update, but my sources are getting this second-handed.
That would be
all
great.
these Fect players are going to be disappointed. They're sitting at number 5 in the current meta watch. They
Right.
finally,
Finally good.
They peaked when they came out, and they went fallow for like 2 years, and now in the last 6 months they've just taken off again.
It surprises me that Flesh Eater Courts is doing as well as it is in the meta that we're in, where you look at these top dogs and you think these are tough things for Flesh Eater Courts to deal with, right? Gloomspike gets in their immense wound buckets, and then Tzeentch and Lumineth. These seem like difficult things for Flesh Eater Courts to deal with, and they're getting there.
Yeah.
Is there anything that really surprises you on this meta watch?
I think Feck being as high as it is was the most surprising thing for me. Iron Jaws being the second worst army is slightly surprising just because, they have movement, they have power. They don't have magic or shooting, obviously, but movement and lots of damage usually works pretty well.
Yeah.
Iron Jaws dipping below 50% always surprises me a little bit because they are so efficient at what they do that they're consistently going to get wins against armies that can't screen properly. And there's a lot of armies that come to the table now very screen light.
Yeah. Cities of Signar just kind of hangs out there, too. Like, maybe it's a very low sample size, but 53% is rather good.
They do a lot of stuff that you want to do in this meta. They have the ability to force their casting out even against Magic Doms because of their huge spell bonuses.
Yep.
They've got excellent shooting, and they've got a bunch of Glacial Champions that are worthwhile.
Sure.
So, yeah, interesting.
So with that being said, we're rolling into 2 new books, like literally hot off the presses. Last Friday we saw the first kind of preview, or like the whole book previews.
The leaks at that point, yeah. So Blades of Khorne and Hedonites of Slaanesh, 2 armies that I love.
Yeah.
Right. I love the theme of them. I love the feel of them. I love the way that in my head they should play. Of course, this last book for Hedonites didn't really play that way. And the last book for Khorne, in a lot of ways, was this tricky melee army that was, like playing a game of chess on the table to move everything in line and line up all your auras, make sure that everything was supported in order to get there. It could be very effective, especially against melee armies. But it didn't feel like you were running across the table and murdering.
No, especially after it got its gray. I'm sorry, what's the
White Dwarf?
White Dwarf. Sorry, Grey Dwarfs. White Dwarf buff that helped it a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
The change in how you spend your points made all of a sudden like movement and fighting and stuff like a possibility where it wasn't before.
Right.
Well, and I always look at you as a Slaanesh player because you brought it to that one tournament we did on the channel.
Sure, I played a tournament with
well,
Slaanesh.
but I played you with Slaanesh,
Sure.
and so that's my headspace. And then I've played you again with Khorne a handful of times, and every time we've played Khorne, it's just a jacket for Archeon to wear, basically. That was
it was for a long time.
It felt good that way too.
Yeah.
But that's obviously changed.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, someone did just 5-0 with Archeon and Scarbrand in a Khorne list, which
maybe it didn't change that much.
Well,
yeah, right?
I think the new book will probably have some of that same potential to run Archeon, to run Strong Allies, but I think the core of the new book on its own is probably much stronger in this new incarnation.
Sure. So keeping it super high level, Slaanesh is coming out.
I always do.
Yeah, and we can, if you want a real good breakdown of everything that's detailed in the book, there's multiple videos out there for everybody to enjoy.
AOS Coach did a fantastic overview. The Honest Wargamer, Rob, did a fantastic overview, went through the entire book, gave his opinions. Good information out there.
Yeah, but on a high level, you being the King Slaanesh player, since you played it at a tournament, what is give us the first of their allegiance abilities, kind of give us your feel for the book and where it's at right now and where you see it going forward.
So appropriately, Slaanesh in its last book had this very perverse incentive structure where you were incentivized to damage but not finish off units, which is the opposite of what you want to do in a game of Age of Sigmar. You want to clean your plate in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So you were incentivized to scatter a bunch of damage around, hurt a bunch of things without finishing them off, rack up your depravity, and then summon buckets of demons onto the field. It was the strongest summoning of any of the Chaos armies, or strongest summoning in the game, probably.
Yeah.
There were games when I played it, 80, 90 Demonettes coming on the table.
For sure.
Was not out of line. And that didn't really feel like Slaanesh. Right. It was a slow, patient army. You ground out your depravity, and then you were getting marginal advantages later in the game because you were getting these model advantages.
But like you said, you were never really killing anything.
Right.
You sat with low run, unimpressive attacks, not a lot of damage, and so it was just how much can I swamp this board, and how long can these models stay alive so that I can hold on for the win rather than I can take the victory, you know?
At the initial phases of the book, the strongest way to play, in my opinion, was to be extremely defensive. I used to run a lot of Chaos Warriors. They had better coalition rules at the time. Chaos Warriors, Glutos to really bog down the board and just bide time. And then later, as points got adjusted, then running a bunch of shooting was the way to do it, right? 60 Bliss Barb Archers, scatter the shots around, get your depravity that way. Neither one of those really felt Slaanesh to me. So their new depravity generation feels way better. You pick a unit of yours on your turn, slam it into an enemy, and the amount of damage they do to that enemy is the amount of depravity you get. So if you've got a 10 wound screen that they blow up, that's 10 depravity. If you've got a 20 wound screen that they blow up, that's 20. That is a much more compelling and Slaanesh-y way to generate their resource, so I like that. They've also got a couple other ways to do it. Temptation dice, where you give your opponent a choice about whether they want to take extra mortal wounds or improve a die roll in exchange for giving you depravity. I think
it's
really cool.
D3 mortal wounds or D6 depravity every time the temptation is taken.
And you get 6 temptation dice per round. You can only use 1 per enemy unit per phase.
Sure.
So 6 is a generous number. You're going to try to jam those out frequently.
Yeah.
Right? There's a little bit, in my opinion, of a timing mistake in how they worded this roll, because it forces decisions in the middle of a sequence. So after the hit roll, after the wound roll, or after the save roll, I don't think they should be pushing decisions in the middle of the sequence, because it incentivizes things like slow rolling your attacks into your enemy to make them decide earlier, or just pausing in the middle of the sequence to think about this decision. I don't like that.
Well, the funny thing is, like, I didn't even know this. Like, if you look at the core rules, technically every attack is rolled individually.
It can be, yeah.
And
that's the default.
That's the default, and then the batch rules is just the generally accepted, what everybody plays, what everybody's been taught. Right. But if you look back at the core rules, I mean, technically a Slaanesh player can roll a dice, offer the incentive. You know, and then... Does anybody want to play a game of AOS that way?
It's only 1 per sequence. It's not like they're slow rolling the entire sequence. But yeah, it's not... I wish they would have just pushed the decision outside of the sequence and said, before making attacks in a sequence, you can offer your opponent a temptation dice. And, you know, their first failure becomes a 6. It would have worked effectively the same way, but push the decision making to the same time that you're deciding about all-out attack, all-out defense, things like that, instead of these sequential decisions.
Yeah, or even after all attacks are made, or after all wounds are allocated, or something.
Yeah, just push it out of the sequence.
Or after all saves are rolled, if there's a failed save, something.
So that's an interesting new ability. But then, so with a Grey Dwarf update we saw along the way, they changed the way the depravity works, so there was actually a table that built. So it used to just be pure summoning when the last book was released. Mm-hmm. Then the Grey Dwarf update was that they had tables of bonuses you got along the way. And now they thought, you know what, that worked.
Right.
Let's keep that going.
Both.
Yeah. And they strengthened what this table looks like. So before, in the White Dwarf update, it was bonuses to movement, and then bonuses to rally, and then a 5-up ward at the capstone. Yep. They kept the 5-up ward at the capstone, moved up the point scale, because, I mean, just depravity are easier to get. You're going to get a bigger number of it. But they moved the number up. And then they gave -1 to hit, potentially army-wide, all your Hedonites. And then
that's
after 12.
At 12. Which is nice.
Pretty easy to get, yeah. -1 to hit army-wide is a big benefit. Right?
Huge.
And then at 24, mortals on 6s, effectively army-wide curse. Mortals on 6s to hit for every melee attack.
Nutty.
Huge. It turns even lackluster units like Demonettes, like Seekers, units that throw out a lot of attacks but not very good quality attacks, turns them into pseudo-hammers. We know how good Curse is, just to have that army-wide. It's fantastic. And then 36, 5-up ward, your entire army becomes Nurgle.
And everything stacks.
Yes, you get all of these, not just one. So as long as you get up to these thresholds and sit there, don't spend them to summon, or don't spend them to summon until you've built up enough to summon in addition. You're just always on these bonuses. Your summons get them when they come in. This is a very strong rule. And we see it in the War Scrolls, that the War Scrolls maybe don't have as much natural power for their points. But when you bake these into them, if you add these rules to a War Scroll, most of these War Scrolls become very good.
The depravity, you're only picking one unit, right? For the combat phase?
Yes, it's for your euphoric killers is the rule. You pick one of your units at the start of the combat phase, and then
what they kill.
It's what they'd kill.
And then
what they did for damage.
And then you have the potential to gain from temptations.
Yep, temptation dice. Each one is either D3 mortals or D6 temptation, or D6 depravity. Generally, I expect opponents are almost always going to take the mortals early in the game. Later in the game, that may pivot, and they may go to depravity instead. But generally, early in the game, I think people are going to take the mortals almost universally.
And then, like you said, you're just not summoning. I mean, there could be edge cases where it's nice to summon, but the bonuses on that depravity table are so good that you don't want to blow any points until you have 46. Because then what's the cheapest to summon at?
18.
Oh, 18. So you're not going to be summoning until you're at 54.
I think what you'll often see is because the mortals to hit are so good at generating depravity, I think what you'll often see is people are willing to, once they get up to 36 or 40, they're willing to summon something cheap that brings them down, but not below 24, with the expectation that in the following combat phase, they're going to get themselves back up to 36 before they're taking things back, or before their opponent's turn. But yeah, once you get to that 24 threshold, that's a big part of your depravity generation. People are going to be very reluctant to dip below that.
Another interesting thing is there's no longer an option to summon 30 demonettes, so a lot of people are going to have a lot of demonettes.
I've got
check
60
them on
of them
eBay right
around,
now. So there's probably some people being like, "Oh, I'm not summoning that many anymore."
Demonettes on their own are better, right? You're now considering running them. It's just a flat out better War Scroll. They've got bonuses to hit, and then when you bring this table into things, their high quality or high number of attacks make them more relevant. But yeah, you're not running 90 onto the table like you used to.
Yeah. So, with that being said, you think, like just your first run through the War Scrolls, you kind of think that they are, maybe all of them have been pointed and scaled to factor in depravity at some point in the game. So they're not coming out hot, but they are definitely going to, once they have all the buffs going, be extremely good at the point level, or
for the units. So I think the heroes come out pretty competitively. The foot heroes, the Glacial Champions, come out pretty competitively just as they are. I think the bigger monsters, with the exception of Gludos comes out pretty okay where he's at as well. For the bigger monsters, the chariots and the keepers, I think they're really going to lean on the depravity bonuses. And then the units are going to lean on the depravity bonuses. When you look at the War Scrolls like the Twin Souls or the Painbringers or everything except the shooting side is perfectly functional without the depravity. But the rest of it really wants the ward, really wants the mortals on 6s, really wants the neg 1 to hit to be part of its defensive profile so that it can hang with some of the melee armies that are in the meta. But once they get there, then they suddenly become really competitive. So I think you're going to have an army where you've got a couple turns building up, and then you start to get... So you're going to lose a little bit of ground, and then you're going to gain it back.
A couple of things from my takeaway from like watching the videos on the book was, clearly Pretenders is by far and away the best sub-faction to play in right now. It has the best command abilities, the best artifacts, and one of the best spells you're ever going to see, which is, I don't know, we should probably just talk about the spell to highlight how good it is.
We'll talk about a couple of them, I think.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, they've got a sub-faction-specific spell lore, which I have trouble remembering any other sub-faction-specific spell lores in the game. But Pretenders is head and shoulders above almost any other sub-faction we've seen. Godseekers, I think, is really, really interesting too, and I think there's going to be a lot of play in Godseekers, especially if they ever, maybe adjust Pretenders downward.
Sure.
Godseekers is really, really good, but Pretenders bring so much to the table.
The command abilities being a lot of, we're going to give you a ton of command points, and then on top of that, we're going to let you issue a bunch of commands using only one command point each time you do that.
Your general can triple issue commands like a Mega Boss on Maw Crusher, and you get 2 extra command points per turn. So 4 extra command points. These aren't command traits. These are just, you have them for your sub-faction. So your general is going to be issuing, triple auto-run 6, triple rally, triple reroll charges, triple all-out attacks on your shooting. You can almost guarantee... triple redeploys. All over, because you're just swimming in these extra command points. That, from a tactician's point of view, you love that, right?
Yeah.
You've got just buckets.
Because you don't have to think anymore.
Right.
Yeah, really,
If you lose your general, then your effectiveness is going to drop off precipitously. It's really built around that general for the Pretenders. But very good as long as they hang around.
And then they have one of the most broken... it's a command trait right now that needs to be fact.
Yeah, the Strength from Godhood will be a perfectly good command trait once it's fixed. And I think it'll be worth running once it's fixed. But for right now, it's the way it's worded, you can get negative 15 rend and 15 damage
plus
on
15
your attacks.
damage, because it's worded that each time you issue a command to a different unit, you stack a rend and you stack a damage. So... And there's no once per turn now. I mean, the rules were written 2 inches away from each other, so it's hard for them to keep those in mind at that point.
Presumably, this is going to be changed so that it's something like once per turn for the rest of the turn. You get 1 extra rend and 1 extra damage on your attacks.
Super cool.
Perfectly good, right?
Yeah.
But the way it's worded right now, that it can stack on itself, is silliness and will be fixed. Right.
And then, what were your favorite artifacts from the Pretenders?
The Crown of Dark Secrets is amazing. And the Crown of Dark Secrets was worth running in the old book, but now you pick one hero on the battlefield at the start of the game, and if if the bearer of the artifact is within 6 inches of them, their attacks characteristic is 1.
And that highlights a bigger thing about this book is just shutting down all your attacks. I mean, it is a debuff monster between... taking away attacks, being -1 to hit.
Potentially -2 to hit in a lot of situations, which shuts off your all-out attacks and things like that.
So, where you might think Hedonites are offensive, no, they're really taking away all your abilities as your opponent.
While also being pretty offensive.
Yeah. They love to get into combat and stick in combat much more so than they used to.
Sure.
In the same way that we see Nurgle doing it, once these buffs get up, and you've got monsters that are -1 to be hit, potentially -1 to be wounded, giving out -1 attacks with a 5-up ward, their 4-up saves are suddenly looking pretty good on the back of all of these debuffs.
And it makes it just kind of frightening to, if you can't take care of them early, they're going to snowball against you, and then I don't know how much gameplay you have against them.
Yeah.
Turns 3, 4, battle rounds 3, 4, and 5.
I think a lot of the early success that this book is going to have is going to be built around shooting cores. There's a lot of shooting synergies in this book. Shooting cores with missiles that can be sent out in melee to generate the depravity and rack that up. And I think we're going to see some shooting castles out of this book that are really, really compelling and strong.
Did you want to highlight a list? Do we want to kind of go through
let's talk about the spell lores,
Yeah, oh yeah. The spell that has to be discussed.
Which one?
A couple of the most powerful spells ever printed, I think, in this spell lore. This is an army that doesn't have bonuses to cast. There are a couple of ways to get rerolls to cast. The Contorted Epitome has a native reroll to cast. Glutos eventually can get to a reroll to cast. And then you've got Master Magic. But you don't have bonuses unless you're doing something strange like allying the Crown Spine.
Sure.
Right. So the casting values are just going to be hard casts. These are a lot of short-range spells. relatively low casting values. Typically, you're going for a 6, and you got a 12-inch range. That's kind of a mark through the book. There are exceptions, but that's generally what you're going for. But the payoff on some of these is really, really good.
Yeah, do you want to read it for us, Alex? I think it's the page above.
Phantasmagoria is the Pretender's real standout spell. So there's one real standout in Pretenders, and there's one real standout in Godseekers when we look at the spell lores.
Yeah. And I even think Invaders has a pretty interesting spell. It's not it's not to the level of
solid B tier.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's Godseekers.
So in Godseekers, we've got Slothful Stupor. Slothful Stupor was an incredibly strong spell available to Greater Demons in the previous book. So that was specifically Sinessa and the Keepers of Secrets only. But now it's available to any Godseekers wizard. 12-inch range. You want to run through it, Alex?
Yeah, so there's a casting value of 7 and a range of 12 inches. Successfully cast, pick an enemy unit within range invisible until your next hero phase. The move characteristic is 3, and all run rolls and charge rolls for that unit are treated as being 3.
Incredible.
Bonkers.
Right. So a 3-inch charge means that any redeploy gets your opponent out of range. You can't move within 3. Any redeploy will kick you out of the range of their charge. 12-inch range is a huge limitation here, obviously. But when you can get something on a 12, you've locked them out of combat effectively if you can redeploy away. And Spell Portal here is really, really compelling at the 12-inch range.
We talked about that a little bit with Spell Portal, and you were saying because the army's so poor at casting to begin with, or doesn't have enough bonuses, it might be a little bit of a fool's errand to bring something that you have to get a portal out and then put another spell through. Mm-hmm. If you're facing against anything that's sufficiently bumped to debuff or unbind or something of that nature. So that makes it a little bit more balanced, I should say.
I think if you had a book like Tzeentch with spell lords like this, where they had big bonuses so they could get out the spell portal consistently and then throw that spell through at 12 inches, you'd see these really become oppressive. I don't think they'll be oppressive in Hedonites, but when they go off situationally, they'll be really, really strong and feel, probably on the negative play experience side, because this is anything, right? You put this debuff on anything within 12 inches, it goes on an Archaon, right? And he can't charge because you redeployed 1 inch.
So Phantasmagoria, if I can remember it from memory, it's cast on a 5. It's
6, I think.
6? Okay.
Might be 5.
Units within 12 again.
Yeah, cast on 5.
And a 5.
Pick an enemy unit within 12.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And anytime they're going to go into combat, that unit...
When they activate to
fight, any units that it wants to fight against can retreat.
One unit.
Oh, one unit. Okay.
One Hedonites unit can retreat. So... There's a couple interactions here in other things in the book, but you can just turn off a unit. If that unit of Chosen or Varying Guard comes into your unit of Painbringers or Blissbarb Archers, it doesn't matter what they are, they activate to fight. Before they make any of their attacks or pile in, you just retreat. You're out of combat.
It's brutal.
It is brutal.
And
it's also the opposite of what you want to do with Slaanesh, though, right? Because you want to be in combat.
Well, you want to choose
your fights. Yeah, absolutely. Especially early on, because you're not going to have that 5-up ward, and you're going to have paper armor.
Yeah. And again, it's 12 inches, and we've seen that before be such a difficult distance. IDK, I've noticed, frequently has 12-inch spells, and that's always been a big drawback. And then they're not great at Magic. So it's got some internal balance. So, but when that happens to you, it's going to be not fun.
There's the one big interaction that we have here. One of the new foot hero for the book, the Lord of Hubris, has a rule that says at the start of the combat phase, he can pick an enemy unit, and it might have to be a hero, but he can pick the unit. And it can only attack him. Can't attack anything else. So this is the same as old Lumineth Goading Arrogance that we saw.
You like that one?
I'm a big fan of that one.
So this one's a little bit more balanced than Goading Arrogance because he has to be in combat with the unit in order to use this ability. They get strike first, and they can only attack him. But now we see this interaction. Let's say I've got a big block of melee stuff and the Lord of Hubris against this unit that I'm picking. And I've got Phantasmagoria on them. They can only attack the Lord of Hubris. They activate to fight. The Lord of Hubris retreats. And now they have no targets for their attacks that are eligible. Their entire combat sequence is wasted. And that melee block that's in combat with them still gets to fight and do its thing.
It's any unit.
Any unit, right. So, yeah, there's a lot of setup here, right? You've got to have the Lord of Hubris in combat with them with a melee unit. They've got to come in, but it can be on their turn. And you've got to get this 12-inch range spell on them.
Yeah.
But when you do, man, that unit is just neutered in a way that we see very few debuffs on this level.
And maybe the Lord of Hubris has the crown on, so you're only giving one attack each. There's so many debuff combos that it's a different Slaanesh now. It's just completely changed from what we were seeing before.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I think it's really compelling. But,
which is good.
Yeah.
Right. It needed some help. And I think it's going to feel a lot better to play. But there are some of these rules that feel a little bit light elfy, let's say. Where you're going to shut down something your opponent is counting on in a very big
We don't want to name the elf, but like
when the book comes off, you're going to peel off the cover and it's going to be Valerian's army.
It's going to be the third Lumineth book.
And I think... Slaanesh should feel this way to some extent, right? It's an evasion tank, right? It's not a tank like a dwarf army where it's just going to take the punch.
Those buzzsaws on the front of their chariots are for evasion.
They're for evasion. Right?
I just want clarification.
Well, Slaanesh should be getting its defensiveness from tricks, right?
Sure.
But some of these tricks do feel a little bit over the top when they go off. And then there'll be a lot of games where they don't go off and don't get an ideal target because of that 12-inch range or your limited casting bonuses. And then it's going to feel a little bit bad that you've got these pieces. But I think there's enough good here. There's a couple of really great allies that come out of this book.
Yeah.
Blissbarb Seekers are a top-notch ally. They give a save debuff that lasts until your next hero phase. In the shooter unit that's got a -1 to save. That's really good for almost any army that can ally them in. The Mask is a really neat ally. It can essentially set up within 3 inches of your opponent in the deployment, in their deployment zone. That's a little bit interesting, and then it's got some punch when it gets there. There's definitely some pieces that you want to look at in this book for other armies. Overall, I think it's a neat book. The chariots overall are cool. They provide bonuses to their same type. So if you're running an Exalted Chariot, you probably want some other Exalted Chariots to go with it. Likewise, Seeker Chariots or Hellflayer Chariots, they benefit their own type. There isn't a lot of chariot synergy outside of that.
Sorry, my dogs are going a little crazy.
Yeah.
They
love recording. That's one thing you know about dogs. Is that
they were silent before you guys got here.
They were sleeping.
Yeah.
So do we want to run through the list that you put together to kind of discuss? I mean, do we want to, before we get into your list, do we want to talk about the Mesmerizing Mirror and the coalition effects? I think, so the Mesmerizing Mirror is a endless spell that casts on a
6, I think.
6, has a range of 18 and an effective bubble of 6, right?
Well, it's got 2 effects. One of the bubbles is a 12-inch bubble. One of the effects is a 6-inch bubble. The 12-inch bubble is any movement that starts there from a non-Hedonites unit. If the move doesn't end closer to the mirror, they take some mortal wounds. Really kind of flavorful, right? They have to move toward the mirror. They're being compelled toward it. The other effect is a 6-inch bubble. And for each non-Hedonites unit, at the end of the movement phase that's near it, you roll 6 dice. And on 6s, they're either at the choice of the controlling player taking mortal wounds or temptation dice, or depravity points, excuse me. So it fits into that temptation dice theme, that making that choice.
And the key word that you glazed over there is that you said Hedonites units, which when you take a coalition unit, they get the Slaanesh keyword. They don't get the Hedonites of Slaanesh keyword.
Right.
So now if you bring any Beasts of Chaos or Slaves to Darkness, well, technically,
you get to
You
choose
get to make that
whether
decision.
you get to choose whether you're generating depravity points or taking mortal wounds.
are you
Generally,
going to take mortal wounds on your
You're
units?
probably going to pick the depravity points instead. So there's a lot of depravity generation that can happen if you coalition in a bunch of stuff, if you ally in a bunch of stuff, and then bomb your own units with the mesmerizing mirror. Now, this is a little bit flavorful. There's the lore here is that units are either staring into the mirror or resisting staring into the
Sure.
mirror. So the idea that you've brought in a bunch of slaves of darkness and they're all sitting and looking at themselves in the mirror, this sort of vain depravity is something Slaanesh would love. But the depravity generation scales with this to be really, really kind of wild.
Yeah.
If you bring 6 cheap units from your various coalition and ally options, maybe costs you 500 points, something like that. There's a lot of 80-point units from slaves, things like that, cockatrices you can pull in. 6 of them will generate you on average 12 depravity per turn, so 24 depravity per round if the mirror sticks around. That's probably above the threshold of what they want this and the spell to generate.
I find it a little bit cheesy. Now, play your army the way you want and do what you want to do with it. I find it a little bit cheesy, and the reason I find it cheesy more than anything is I think this army is balanced by you need to look for ways to get your depravity, and that might put you in awkward positions at times because early on you're not the army that you're going to be later.
Right.
So you might have to overextend to get to the point you want to be later. This, you still have to do that to a certain extent, but this also can be now put it so that you're a castle, and then once you get to turns or battle rounds 3, 4, and 5, it's hard to deal with them.
Right. You're going to have all your buffs rolling, and you're going to have summoning kicking on the back of this as well. I think, there are levels of cheese, right? I like the idea of bringing this in with a couple of allies that you want to bring anyway. And we'll talk about some of the allies that you want to bring. But bringing this in early in the games, you're maybe generating a little bit of depravity from using it on yours. Later in the game, you throw it on the opponent and then start racking up the mortal wounds or depravity on them, because this is a pretty good offensive bubble endless spell. So I like dual use endless spells for sure.
What does it cost of that?
60 points.
Affordable.
Yeah,
Affordable.
certainly reasonable. Let's maybe get into a list that uses this and has a bunch of other tricks as well.
Sure. Cool. So this is kind of a list for Slaanesh that we're expecting that will be one of the more popular kind of builds right along with the release, right?
I think so. This is going to be, it's going to play in a shooting castle with some of those melee missiles to generate your depravity early, and then it's going to maybe do some summoning late. It's got some compelling ally choices, and then it's got the ability to generate a lot of depravity in some situations. So this is Pretenders in Hedonites, as we mentioned, and this is leaning on a couple of those strong things. The general here is the Contorted Epitome, who is one of the best Galatian champions, in my opinion, in this entire season. The reason for that is it's a 7 wounds on a 5-up, which is not very durable, but the shooting protection it's got in this season really helps it stay alive.
Huge.
And then it's got a 2-up mortal wound shrug. So any spell doms or Sylvaneth bombs, Lumineth that's pumping out mortal wounds, this is effectively immune to those.
2-up is
It's real
efficient.
good. Yeah. So it also can slap in melee. It's at 11 attacks base, 2 of them are 2 damage, 9 of them are 1 damage. And then it's got some ways to increase that damage, whether you run Flaming Weapon or Strength of Godhood. We expect Strength of Godhood is going to get changed. Right now, it's kind of silly how degenerate
it's
it
the
is.
obvious back,
Yes,
like we
day
have with
one,
KO.
right. But once it's fixed, what we expect is -1 rend and +1 damage on all its attacks, which is really good when you've got 11 attacks.
yeah.
Right?
What if it doesn't get fixed?
If it doesn't get fixed, then this will lift anything in the game.
We bow down to our new masters.
Right.
I'm fine with it.
So this has got the Crown of Dark Secrets as well, so it's going to be able to pick one hero and effectively just shut it down in melee. So it'll be able to roll in, put all of its attack profiles down to 1, and make it so it can't use any command abilities or receive any command abilities. That's a really good thing. Also has a bubble of can't retreat. So if it locks into a hero with that Crown of Dark Secrets, something short of Kragnos on 1 attack per profile is just not going to be able to lift it. It can roll into something, lock it in combat, can't retreat, it's stuck there. Kragnos can probably kill the Contorted Epitome even on 1 attack per profile. Sure. A Mega Gargant rolling well will be able to do it. This is a situation where you might look at the Gatebreaker and say, I'm going to do that 1 attack instead of the many attacks. One of those rare situations.
Yeah, there it is. There's the reason.
The downside is that it does mortal wounds, so this is going to ignore this.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's a lot that makes this a really cute piece that is very versatile. 2-caster that rerolls, so it's going to do your endless spell. It's got Phantasmagoria here. I really see this as something that can be just behind your front lines. It's got the speed to move around. It's got Tunnel Master and can lock things down and be a neat piece. The Contorted Epitome has always been good, better now than ever, I think. Also have the Mask, and the Mask has, as I mentioned, after deployment, you set up outside of 3 inches of your opponent, wholly within their territory. And so if you have turn choice here and your opponent leaves you an opening to a hero, the Mask can go up to 9 2-damage attacks and can just delete a lot of foot heroes. If you're set up for it, you pop Finest Hour, you do your all-out attack, you got 9 2s and 2s, neg 1, 2 damage, maybe you debuff their save as well with your Bliss Barbs. The Mask can get it done against a lot of foot heroes, and then has a 4-up ward and ability to heal that mean that your opponent need to overcommit to it.
Yep.
When you see a 4-up ward, you need to overcommit, right? Because the dice can spike and really ruin your day.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the Shard Speaker of Slaanesh, great 1-caster, has a great War Scroll ability, one of the most flavorful War Scrolls, I think, in Age of Sigmar right now. When it gets a cast off, she gets this Dark Spirit that enhances her attacks, gives her a 4-up ward. It's a really cool thematic sort of ability. But she also gives neg 1 to saves out to, I want to say, 9 inches.
And that's after the cast, or is that just in?
That's in the movement phase, I think, is the timing on that. I have to double check.
Yeah.
End of the movement phase, something like that. But she becomes another key piece in debuffing, and that's kind of a recurring theme. You're going to see those debuffs go on and on. Contorted Epitome can pop out D3 units. Your army is going to get +1 to wound against them on its spell out to 24 inches, which is really, really good. It can help even from turn 1, typically.
Yeah.
When we get into the units here, 33 total Bliss Barbs in 2 separate units. They got a huge glow up. Their hit profile is just 1 better than it was before, and their cost didn't significantly increase. So before they were 4s and effectively 3s. The homunculus brings them down a wound. So 4s and 3s, 2 shots, neg 1, 1 damage. Now they are 3s and 3s. Neg 1 damage.
Does the homunculus bring them down to 3s and 2s?
No, that's with the homunculus. So they're 3s and 4s on the scroll, down to 3s and 3s. But so already way better, way more output just from that. But then because of the way they're going to interact with your Bliss Barb Seekers, which are going to give them extra rend effectively, these blocks are going to be 2 shots each, oftentimes 3s and 3s or 2s and 3s. Neg 2, 1 damage each. And that's the level of shooting where things really start getting lifted.
Yeah.
So, compelling shooting here at an affordable cost, $450 for the 33 Bliss Barbs. 5 Seekers, on their own, they're just a cav screen. They are the sort of unit that really glows up when it gets mortals on 6s to hit, though. Buckets of attacks, they get extra attacks when they start killing models. So this is kind of a second wave hammer. Once you've built up to 24, they can go in and be another wave at a cheap price, or they're a screen before that. 2 units of 5 Slick Blade Seekers. These are really your melee hammers. So this is a 14-inch run and charge, 3 attacks each on the glaives, but they get an extra attack if they're going into 5 or more models, or wounds characteristic of 3, something like that.
Wounds characteristic of 3 or less.
3 or less. So 4 attacks each with the glaives. 3s and 3s, neg 2, 1 damage. With the debuffs here, really, that's 3s and 2s, neg 3, 1 damage, typically. Those are easy debuffs to get. Potentially mortals on 6s, mount attacks that are also getting the mortals on 6s. this is going to be your depravity generation. So turn 1, run and charge with 14-inch, bring these into a screen. You're happy to throw into a screen, which is unlike most cav. You don't want to put your Varengard into a screen. But these you're happy to throw into a screen, ideally a 20 wound screen like Noblars or Clan Rats, where you can get 20 depravity in one turn with them and really rack that up. And then a Cockatrice, they're as good as it gets. Everybody
Just
knows
never
that.
leave home without them.
Another layer of debuffs. A unit of Blissbarb Seekers, they're the shooting component compared to the Slick Blades, which are the melee ones. Blissbarbs have a -1 save penalty if they put any wounds through in shooting. And so just getting them into something with 14-inch run and shoot, just getting them into something, chipping off a couple of wounds on a hard target, then kicks their save down, which is going to make it's going to turn on everything in this army. The Bliss Barbs are going to become very, very killy shooting. The Slick Blades are going to become murder ponies. That's really, really great. And then a Chaos War Shrine, March Slaanesh. Chaos War Shrine in Slaanesh gives any Slaanesh unit on a 3-up prayer 3d6 to charge.
Which you just want that. That's fun stuff.
Amazing. 3d6 to charge really helps you do end rounds on screens and to get places that your opponent never really expected. The Seekers are already maybe the fastest unit in the game there. They're 14-inch move. They can run and charge. They run 2d6, and then they can potentially be charging 3d6. So once you get a couple buffs up, those Seekers can get anywhere and take out anything with the mortal wounds on attacks. They're really neat. This is a fast, killy list with a core of a shooting castle.
You got the Mesmerizing Mirror, which we discussed, and then you are running 2 Battle Regs here.
Double Battle Reg.
So that your 2 drop. Again, it looks like you're always going to want to be low drops because you... But this feels like you want to dictate. You want to take first turn almost, depending upon your opponent, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on what. Really, that decision for me is going to come down to what can I get into turn 1. Do they have a 20 wound screen I can get into turn 1?
They're now screening their screens with their elite stuff.
Screens.
The Shard Speaker here has a Born of Damnation. That's going to get you some extra depravity generation. You're going to use your Temptation dice to both increase your shooting damage output by getting extra D3 mortals on their targets and to increase your depravity generation. And then you've got the Mirror that can hit the Cockatrice and War Shrine early on and then be projected forward to get a couple extra depravity. But when you can get a 20 wound screen, along with those other things, you're going to get to your mortals on 6s in potentially turn 1. And when you can do that, it's hard to turn down turn 1.
Yeah, it seems... whenever I sit here and I look at a list, it's always like, this all seems busted.
This is going to beat everything. And then you play it, and...
It's like, this is all good. They still died fast.
The nice thing, or the thing that I always find, is that I can let any list down. No matter what it is.
Right.
I don't think this is going to be ultra oppressive. The one limitation that this has is that it's got a lot of ways to get you to 88 miles an hour. Right?
Yeah.
It can get you to that depravity threshold quickly and have some good shooting damage to take out some key pieces. But what it's lacking then on the back end is something to really finish, because a lot of times you're going to be burning up these Slick Blade Seekers to get you that depravity.
No flux capacitor.
Right. And then it maybe doesn't have as much finishing power as things. Maybe it's relying on a little bit of summoning to kick in, bring in a keeper late so that you're double fighting something and bringing in some extra damage.
I mean, it sounds like potentially bringing a keeper early.
The mortal wounds on 6s does not work for shooting. Is it melee only?
It's melee only.
Okay, that's a little bit of a relief, because otherwise those Bliss Barbs can
they
sit
would just
back
be
and just...
absolute blenders, yeah.
I mean, still the Bliss Barbs, the most comparable unit to these Bliss Barbs now are Reavers, and if you've played against IDK Reavers, they're extraordinarily effective. And these are cheaper Reavers, so they're really scary.
And they're very fast. They've got run and shoot natively. They've got decent range on their shooting, 6-inch base movement. They have a tissue paper save.
6 up, right?
Right. But 22 wounds, even on a 6-up save, with -1 to hit, and potentially -1 attacks from the Shard Speaker spell, and potentially a 5-up ward. The save is no longer what you're getting your defense from. And 22 wounds can be a little bit difficult to wade through once all those debuffs layer up. You're going to need to screen them early on especially, but they're not going to be as easy to lift as they normally would on a 6-up.
Well, they seem like they're going to be the units that survive, right? Like
Yep.
I feel like at the end of the game, you probably are going to be down the Seekers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you might be down, but you are going to have a pretty solid 33 block of Bliss Barb still running around, moving, and that's going to be your taking objectives, taking stuff off still. So,
Right.
and
Now,
then that's when the Contorted Epitome is going to be coming in and
it's
being
going to come in and
extremely
clean
effective
something
too.
up. Yeah. Important to note, your Bliss Barbs are always going to all have all-out attack. Right? As long as your Contorted Epitome is alive, he's going to triple issue all-out attack to the Bliss Barbs and the Bliss Barb Seekers. When they come in, you're going to be able to redeploy all 3 of these units. You're going to be able to all-out attack 3 melee units or all-out defense 3 melee units. The numbers that you get from that are going to start to bolster some of the lacking that you have there. 2s and 3s is the standard profile when you have as many command points as these have.
Yeah. I mean, you'll never be short of command points. You just never will have any issues. No, it looks like a super fun list, super fast. You know, not, a lot of stuff is going to be dying. If I would, what would you fear if you were playing this list?
War Shrine.
What would you specifically not want to play against?
Anything that has a ton of wounds on the table, you're going to have a lot of trouble with. Anything with very high output, even after some of those debuffs kick in. You know, Squigs is going to be something that you're better against kind of Squig herd than most things because you can really force a lot of battle shocks with this kind of shooting.
Sure.
But against just fast Squigs, a Mangler, and some Boing Rot Bounders, your shooting output isn't going to cripple those units before they can get 4-up rallied and ruin your day. And so those things where they can really blow you up early in the game, get across the table and blow you up early in the game, you're going to struggle against.
So the most broken army in the game is threatening to this list. That
Yes.
is
Well, also,
is,
Magic Doms are going to ruin your day.
yeah.
Techless loves to play against something like this.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking of. I mean, you were kind of licking your lips about putting Storm of Fear and White Light into this.
Yeah.
And just seeing where that goes. I also think just something like pigs that are 1-drop that are going to get across the table and really put you into one awkward spot early might be, you know, as a Iron Jaws player, I want to play for the double. And I don't know if I want to play for the double necessarily against this just because of how much, like you said, you're going to force a lot of bravery checks and you're going to take some stuff off early just with the shooting and stuff. So it would be an interesting matchup to consider.
I think top 1 with this against pigs, assuming the Iron Jaws player does go for the double, maybe they're 1-drop or you go first. What you really want to do is get that 20 wound block of Slickblade Seekers tagged into something. And you want to get the mask in their deployment zone. And then you want to have your line of Seekers and probably those 11 Bliss Barb archers screening on your side. So that in their turn, they are killing the stuff in their deployment. And then on your turn, they're coming into screens.
Yeah.
And that's really limiting the effectiveness of their double and perhaps setting you up into your double then with all your buffs up. But they are going to punch you in the mouth really hard with as not durable as a lot of these things are.
So, circling back on our earlier conversation, where do you think this book sits? Obviously, not, there are things that are going to be FAQ'd and, little things that'll change, and who knows how it'll affect the whole meta, but where do you think this is going to sit in that whole list of armies?
I think this is a fat metal book. I think this is a book that, when we looked at that meta watch, the things that are at the top of that bracket are really good against this. The things that are at the bottom of this bracket, this can probably do pretty well against a lot of them. And so I think it's going to find its way into the middle. And I don't think it's going to have, I think when we talk about Khorne after this, Khorne is going to have an impact on the meta.
Yeah.
It's going to shift some things. I don't think this book is going to shift much in the meta. I think the good are going to stay good, the bad are going to stay bad against an army like this.
I'm a little higher on it. I think just based on speed, debuffs, the ability to castle up, if the mirrors trick stays around, if you really want to play that heavily, I think it's a little bit more of a, like, it's not like A plus or S tier. I think it's going to sit at the top of the Bs and border right along the A
upper
tier.
middle.
Even A tier, bottom A, and be a unique challenge. I don't know how many Slaanesh players are. Obviously, the book's been so bad for so long, it's hard to get a good gauge on it. But like, this is going to be a unique challenge whenever you see it. It's just throws something completely different than what you're used to seeing right now from other armies that are maybe more offensive or, you know, don't have the kind of debuffs or whatever. So I think it slots in well just as something that they found a unique spot for it. So it should be fun.
I often say that movement is the most important stat on any war scroll, and this is a book that has a very good movement stat.
Flies around.
It's going to be a little bit difficult to deal with. It's going to be, I think, in some ways, it's going to be technical to play, but speed tends to make an army more forgiving.
For sure. And like you said, it's got that in spades. So
yeah, absolutely.
A book that comes out and gets into that, you know, that chunky middle area. Like, that's kind of what you want. You don't want something that's gonna rocket to the top and push everything down.
We've been wrong many times before.
We've been wrong
it could be an F- book, and
the
it
time.
also could be S tier.
I mean, who knows?
We're consistently wrong. That's the one thing you can count on.
Well, and the problem with the meta, with like the meta, is if you have a 45% win rate, is it because 10,000 people played this army and, you know, a little more than half of them didn't do well, or is it because 5 people did okay? Or is it, you know, it's hard to gauge that way.
Meta set, certain armies attract players who really want to kind of wring the juice out of them, and those armies tend to overperform as a result, right? There's a handful of armies that typically don't get played by a lot of players. Beast of Chaos, I think, was in this bucket. Didn't get played by a lot of players. The players who played it tended, with exceptions, tended to be experienced and very good players.
Well, and that was like Legion of the First Prince.
Legion of the First Prince, same thing, right? So their win rates were oftentimes pushed upward by the quality of players as much as they were by the quality of the books.
Yeah.
And I think this may be one of those books.
But this is also a book where if I'm going to a tournament with this list or something that, you know, people are going to be creative, come up with other things, I don't feel like I'm bringing a knife to a gunfight, right?
No,
like I
you
feel
can win
like
games with this. Yeah.
This is going to win. I can comfortably think if I play it well, I'm going to go 3-2, and if I have a great tournament, I can 5-1.
Yeah.
So
like we said, or like I said, at least, I don't think this is going to shift the meta too much. I think it's going to leave things mostly where they are relative to it. Who knows where it's going to settle in. Khorne, though, which we're going to talk about next, I think really could switch around the meta a little bit.
Yeah. So Khorne is releasing at the same time as Slaanesh, and you know, for a while we had been talking about these birds or whatever, these rumors we'd been hearing that this book was.
It was broken.
Yeah, like watch out, it's Blades of Khorne time, and you know that could always be true. There could be things that I'm not seeing about the book, but this book is coming in, and like Nick was mentioning, it's gonna slot in to a very unique place in the meta that's going to shake up some of these top armies that have been depending upon Magic. So the book is largely written the same as the old book was as far as... why can't I think of
the Blood Tithe?
Blood Tithe
functions very similarly to before.
Yes. And it's not like Slaanesh where you're building Tithe and you're staying at a certain point. You're always either spending it to summon or you're spending it for bonuses. So, do we have the Blood Tithe?
I'm trying to bring them up right now.
Yeah.
Many of the abilities are the same, but the Allegiance ability went from a 6-up spell ignore that generated Blood Tithe to a 5-up spell ignore that generated Blood Tithe. On its own, that's a big improvement. And now on the Blood Tithe table, very notably, you can improve that. So you can make that a 4-up and then a 3-up or even a 2-up spell ignore that generates Blood Tithe and really shut down some of the offensive casting in the game.
And the demons got the Locus of Fury, which is models that are outside of 8 inches in the shooting phase have a 5-up ward. So now we're seeing it. It's already grabbing like a kind of unique space. Now we're anti-magic. We're a little bit anti-shooting. What armies do we see use that? Well, obviously Lumineth is right at the top of my mind.
Yeah.
Or even Tzeentch to a certain extent. So that's kind of exciting just to see something that kind of picks on that right off the bat.
It's very kind of interactive shooting ward. Being able to get within that 8-inch bubble and turn that off, or that 6-inch bubble, or 8 inches, right?
Yeah.
It's Khorne, of course it's 8.
Yeah, it's gotta be 8.
Being able to get within 8 inches, turn off that ward, and start doing the shooting as normal. But that's kind of where Khorne wants you, right?
Yeah. Right. And I don't want to go through each of the Blood Tithe. You can kind of see that it still has where you can shut down a spell with
Spell Eater Curse.
Spell Eater Curse, which is just awesome.
Yep. Incredibly good against something like Teclis. It's casting on a 10.
And then we're seeing, like we said, Rising Hatred, which is the +1 to the Hatred of Sorcerer roll. So once you get to 10 Blood Tithe, if you're playing anything with magic, now you're on a 3-up spell ignore that generates another Blood Tithe every time. So that's going to shut down any offensive magic that anyone's going to do against you.
They just kind of can't do it, right? And if they've got endless spells on the table that are kicking out at you, they have to think about pulling them off the table so that you're not generating with it.
What else obviously, there's the movement that still exists, which is
Fight
awesome.
in the hero phase is still here and still just as good as it ever was.
I mean, and little Khorne's always struggled against like Unleash Hell. You come in with a Greater Demon and you eat an Unleash Hell, and all of a sudden you're bracketed and your attacks aren't as effective. Well, again with the movement, now we're able to get into combat without necessarily charging,
right?
Which is awesome because you need frequently you just need a Greater Demon to be really fighting, or your unit to be at full power to do what it needs to do.
A couple other things here: the ability to give your entire army an extra rend for a turn. You're probably not going to want to use it typically, but there are going to be situations where that buff can be compelling. The ability to bust out some mortal wounds, the Brass Skull Meteor, which is it's an option, right? It's better now than ever on large wounds, large units.
When I've played Khorne in the past, like you said, what I frequently found was I was spending a lot of stuff at the bottom of the table.
Right.
Like I wanted to do Spell Eater Curse, or I wanted to move, or I wanted to fight, or I wanted to just summon the cheapest bodies I could to sit on an objective. So it is, unless you're getting towards the end of the game, or just you've built a list that specifically is around to build Blood Tithe, you're frequently not going to get to like summon a Greater Demon or get to the very top stuff. But the stuff at the bottom to the middle level of the tables are so good that you're going to feel great never doing that top stuff.
Kind of the 4 and up, or if you're in one of the matchups where the magic ignore really matters, then that 5th one starts to become really compelling. Those are the places you're going to live in this table, typically, historically.
So then another thing I just thought that I took away from this book is all the units got a lot tougher.
Yeah.
Like, we saw the Bloodthirsters all...
Before you go into this,
go ahead.
the one other allegiance ability is that all of your mortal units, so the demons are going to get the shooting protection, all of your mortal units are there to die. And when they die, they're going to kick back murder rolls, which is very similar to the Stormcast ability, where they blow up and do mortal wounds. The murder rolls are on a 5-up for each model that's slain, or 3 dice for 5-ups if it's a hero. And that the Stormcast really favors high wound models, so something like Karazai, where you get 18, 19 dice. This is much better on something like Blood Reavers, where you get a bucket of them.
And then some of your more elite troops and more elite mortals get to roll extra dice as well.
Yeah, your Blood Warriors, Korgorath, Korgorath Cole's got
Skull
rules
Reapers,
interaction with this.
yeah.
So, but go on. I just wanted to touch on that as the last allegiance ability.
So it got a glow up as far as it made a lot of the War Scrolls came down in rules quite a bit, but they also improved. Like your Bloodthirsters now all have 4 extra wounds.
I wouldn't call them improved.
No. I would say they're core stats. So they got 4 extra wounds.
2 extra wounds.
2 extra wounds. They went from 14 to 16. They got 2 extra inches of movement, which doesn't seem like a lot, but
It's a big deal. 10 inches of movement really started to feel bad on Bloodthirsters.
yeah. So it's movement 12 now, and 2 inches doesn't seem like a lot, but as Nick was mentioning, there was frequently times when 10 inches, if you had to be anywhere, it was extremely difficult.
Didn't feel real
down.
good. Yeah. And they've also got, if you bring an Unfettered Fury Thirster, they've got ways to get 3d6 charging. They've got the One Blood Tide to get an extra d6 movement. The Thirsters in general are going to feel a lot faster, or can feel a lot faster. There were ways before where you could normal move, charge, and then fight, and then it seemed like they were screaming fast, where you could double the normal move. But in general, I think they're going to feel faster across the table. But the Thirsters' output really kind of fell off when they lost Reapers of Vengeance.
Yeah, there's ways to like let them fight in order, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's ways to obviously with Blood Tide fight, in the hero phase. So
Yeah.
there's things of that nature. But and Scarbrand came down just like a little bit in the fact that Scarbrand, the build that you kept
I
seeing,
think a lot.
yeah, a lot. So the builds you used to see a lot with Scarbrand was you try to just give him a couple extra attacks on his Rage, I think it was, or Carnage. And when you're rolling 3 dice from Carnage, your mortal wound output was insane. Now it's capped at 1, which is going to hurt those Scarbrand builds quite a bit.
Well, Scarbrand, before, you would typically expect that Scarbrand's going to go into something. He's going to fight with 2 attacks with Carnage. He's going to have a bunch of attacks with Slaughter, too, and that's going to be great. But Carnage is going to do 16 mortal wounds because it's 2 dice. Maybe it's going to do 24 because he has Spike of 6. And then you're going to double fight him, so he's going to do another 16 mortal wounds, or 24. So call it 32 mortal wounds when Scarbrand fights.
Yeah.
32 mortal wounds. I played Scarbrand. 32 mortal wounds ends a lot of people's games.
Yes.
Like, there's a lot of handshakes that happen after Scarbrand does 32 mortal wounds.
I don't know. That's not enough.
Well, now Scarbrand is going to come in and he's going to do 8.
Right.
Maybe he's going to do 16 if you spike that 6, right? But that's it. He's not fighting twice. He doesn't have 2 attacks on that profile anymore. 32 mortal wounds down to 8 is a radical difference, right?
Yeah, it's a big change, and but I mean, it's a new book, so let's the stuff from the old book's got to die. I haven't dug so far into the new book that I haven't figured out the exact best Thirster build, but I think we're to the point where maybe it's only like one Thirster that's going to augment an army rather than a whole army of Thirsters.
The Unfettered Fury Thirster I really like now. He's got 2 very compelling rules. One is he gives a unit 3d6 charge. And then the other is that he has a bubble, an 8-inch bubble of -1 to hit for enemy units. And then on 4-ups, D3 mortal wounds. And the mortal wounds is nice, but the bubble of -1 to hit on a durable, kind of tanky support monster, I think that maybe makes him compelling in non-Thirster builds. The rest I would have a hard time running in Thirster builds. Scarbrand, honorable mention in Slave to Darkness. If you run him through a Soulscream Bridge, he has native 3d6 charge. And, Slaves to Darkness units are expensive enough that maybe you think about Scarbrand as a hammer there. But in Khorne, I don't know if he makes a cut.
We did see Blood Letters get a big glow up as far as they are now 2 wounds apiece, 180 points for 10 of them, and they still have their decapitating blow, which is mortal wound on 6.
Right. Not in addition anymore, but
right. But now there's a sub faction that lets them do mortal wounds on 5s and 6s. So
when they charge, yeah.
2-inch reach, so
Yep.
you don't have to really be worrying about putting them in a battalion. You can easily run a big bomb of them and get them in and really put the hurt in on a unit.
Overall better profile. They went to 3s and 3s, 2 attacks natively, which is making up for the fact that your Blood Secretor isn't always giving them the bonus attack, so there's some compensation for that. And then there are, in my opinion, better prayers that you can apply to them. So there are better ways to buff them up, get their output up there. The comparison a lot of people are making right now is Gut Rippers. Gut Rippers feel in many ways the same as this. They've got a bunch of attacks that are doing mortal wounds on 5s. You know, Gut Rippers is not a good place to be.
You don't want the Gut Rippers comparison.
Right.
This reminds me.
I think there's maybe more synergies in this book that are really going to make them compelling. 3d6 charge, extra rend, so the attacks that get through that aren't mortals are going to be better. And then there's a lot more recursion and higher bravery here.
Yeah. So that's kind of a high-level demon side. Could you go to the artifacts? So there's definitely some of the smaller demon heroes are going to be worth it just to bring some of the artifacts for the demons together specifically.
A couple of things I'd mentioned on demon units before we move off of them. There's a couple of ways to recur your bloodletters, like I mentioned. So the Blood Throne can bring back D6 bloodletters on a prayer. D6 2 wound models back is a lot. And then there's a command trait to bring back D3 of them. So that synergy is good. Blood Crushers are one of the more effective damage per point units in the book. We'll talk about there's not a ton of great hammers here, but they're a little bit compelling. And the Bloodmaster out of nowhere became a priest, which is awesome.
Yeah, because we always were only using Slaughter Priest to do anything. Now they've kind of made a couple of cheap options, so you have it on both sides. And the Halo of Blood grants first strike to the bearer, which is always good, because then you can put it into the battalions where you're putting it with a unit of bloodletters, so then you're doing that kind of sneaky.
Right. And he doesn't even need the battalion with bloodletters. He can just chain fight with bloodletters. Yeah. Argrath, King of Blades, turns off wards in a bubble, which is really, really great.
Niche, but
yeah,
good.
When it hits hard.
Yeah.
Right. When you get that ward turned off against something like Hearthguard Berserkers, and you just blow them up.
Yep. And then some more anti-magic stuff. But then I kind of think the strength of the book is kind of in the mortals.
I agree. I think they definitely shifted this book to be much more mortal focused. The lists that we saw doing well in this book before were Reapers of Vengeance, run 4 Bloodthirsters.
Yep.
Which, by the way, is just a super cool thing to see.
It is.
It is.
And Bloodthirsters have gotten to the point where they were cheap enough that you actually did get to surround them with enough supporting stuff to make them kind of interesting, generate blood tithe and stuff of that nature.
Right. I think they wanted to skew hard away from that. And we see that in some of the options. The Bloodbound side of this book, which has been terrible for a long time, is now really compelling and interesting. I don't know if it's the book that Khorne players necessarily wanted, or the Timmies that want to play Khorne. I don't think they necessarily wanted this, but it is really compelling.
Well, let's describe why we say that. So, if you look at the book, we were talking about a list to do as a demonstration, just like we did with Slaanesh, and there's not good hammers, at least upon first glance, that really stick out on you in this book. There's a lot of good anvils. Skull Reapers now, or I'm sorry,
Mighty Skull Crushers.
Mighty Skull Crushers are now natively 2-up saves.
With ways in this book to give them +1 to save through a prayer, and then potentially you can Arcane Tome for a Mystic Shield, something like that. All out defense them. Yeah.
They're going to be super hard to shift. But a lot of it's -1 rend, 1 damage, or on their better weapon profiles, it's 2 damage. But it's not going to be one of those things where you can, murder ball something. It's going to be I think, more attritional. We're going to camp objectives. We're going to do tricks, and we're going to stick around. And then, you can find a hammer, or you can use a prayer to get to 2 rend and stuff like that.
You can stack up some buffs, get a curse off, and then anything can be a serviceable hammer. Right.
But specifically, so on the Bloodbound side, we have a Blood Secretor. Blood Secretor no longer grants +1 attack within its bubble all game. It does it once a game.
Right.
But all Bloodbound units 3 wounds or less now rally on a 4-up while they're within that bubble. That's insane.
That's the mortal side. So when we talk about the demon side, it's got the shooting protection of a 5-up ward outside of 8. Shooting protection comes in a different form here.
Yeah.
4-up rally is incredibly good shooting protection.
For sure. And it's, again, Blood Secretors are hard to deal with just because of the edition we're in. Slaughter Priests, I think you'll frequently be taking them as your general, so you can get them on a command trait so that they know 2 prayers. There's
so that they can pray twice.
Pray twice, yes. And some of the endless prayers.
Invocations.
Invocations
the
are
endless prayer.
are super strong again.
Yeah.
So I think you'll be building around Bloodsecrator, Slaughter Priest, maybe 2, and then Bloodstoker, which now is changed a little bit. Now it can whip D3 units, and all those get the run and charge ability. But now on a 1, they might take some mortal wounds.
Right, but it's guaranteed that they'll get the run and charge, which is a really nice benefit to an army that can otherwise be a little bit slow.
You should take some mortal wounds if you're getting whipped.
Yeah, I always thought that was weird.
Every
that
time I get
didn't-
whipped, I
it
take
didn't
mortal
work.
wounds.
Yeah.
Slaanesh disagrees.
Right. Were there any other of the particular heroes that you thought stood out, like a Skullgrinder or the Expiring Deathbringer or anything like that?
Scar Bloodwrath is exceptional again.
Yeah.
His ability is to die multiple times. And everything else in this book can only be wiped out once. He can be wiped out multiple times, which is really big for Blood Tithe. The Skull Grinder, I think it's called, the one with the anvil.
Yep.
He gives a Bloodbound hero 1 extra rend. Maybe there's something there that you can do.
Is Valkia interesting?
Valkia, I think, is good. She gives a +3 bravery bubble. She deep strikes, and then once per game, after she comes in from deep strike outside of 9, she does effectively D6 mortal wounds to a target. D6 mortal wounds is really nice, kind of on a stick, and then she's a 6 wound, 3-up save, fast hero with that +3 bravery bubble to Bloodbound. Bloodbound is a side of this, especially with the rally bonuses. You want to lose models, do your murder rolls, and then rally back. And a component to that is your bravery, and +3 bravery on the Bloodbound side of it. I think it's really good. Valkia, I think, is worth playing.
Wrathmongers are still granting their +1 attack.
On a surprisingly big bubble, because you can string them out.
Their attacks got a little bit better, which is nice. Skull Reapers, which are kind of a default hammer because they can take buffs well. They come back well from the rally. They have a lot of attacks, and they can get more. But at 190 points, they compare unfavorably when you look at something like Chosen or something of that nature, which is just innately great. If you give a bunch of buffs, Skull Grinders can be interesting.
Skull Reapers.
Skull Reapers, yes.
Blood Reavers are good because they do what they've always done. They die. They give you a Blood Tithe. They took some hits in the process, and now they're kicking back some mortal wounds as they go out. So Blood Reavers are still very serviceable.
And Blood Warriors got a lot better.
Blood Warriors, huge glow up. 3-up save is the biggest change there.
And can they roll multiple points or multiple dice?
They each get to roll 2 murder dice, and they got some native rend now, which they badly needed. They no longer have the fight on death. They've got the bonus to murder rolls instead, but it probably maths out to more damage.
I would say their attacks were so poor before that nobody wanted them to fight on death.
And then they still have the option, depending on loadout, to kick back mortal wounds on save. So now that they're on a 3-up save, that's a lot more interesting because it takes more attacks to kill them. So they're kicking back more mortal wounds on that ability. They're kind of an interesting porcupine.
Yeah. So do we want to kind of talk about the list that we brought? And then it kind of will help us kind of round out our discussion on the army. So the list that we're bringing here is Blades of Khorne, the Flayed. So the Flayed grants a 5-up ward if that unit has fought in that combat phase.
Right. It's only in the combat phase and only after they fight. So it's very situational, but this list specifically has at least one trick to make that a little bit more reliable.
Yep. So Scar Bloodwrath is an awesome... I always found it as a great screen that you just run out there, you start generating tons of Blood Tithe. The Bloodstoker, I don't think you'll ever... Bloodstoker, Bloodsecrator, and 1 Slaughter Priest. I have a hard time believing you're ever going to run a Khorne army without that triumvirate if you're running Bloodbound. Right. So on the Bloodsecrator, you're going to have the Banner of Blood, which grants a 16-inch bubble of rerolls to charge, which... People sometimes poo-poo rerolls to charge, but when it's innate and you don't need to be spending any command points on it, I love it.
There is an enhancement being spent here from Warlord to get that Banner of Blood. If you don't value that as much, you could go to more of a battle regiment style, or you could make that a prayer lore enhancement, which with 3 priests is a little bit interesting to get some more options on your prayers, but I like the Banner of Blood.
Yeah. As we mentioned, you're going to run the Slaughter Priest as your general to make him a high priest so he can pray twice. Unholy Flames is the Rend prayer, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Rumgor, you're going to have to talk about those.
So the Realmgore Ritualist is the brand new hero. I've got one on pre-order. I'm excited about him. What he can do is pick one terrain piece or objective. And it's important that it's or objective. And then for the rest of the battle, Khorne units wholly within 8 inches of that have +1 to hit.
Sure.
And there's a lot of things in Khorne that you want those +1 to hit bonuses on. There's a lot of things that hit on 3s or 4s, and you only get 1 all-out attack. You're going to be a little bit limited in command points, I think, in a lot of cases, because you're really going to be reliant on your saving battle shock and your all-out defenses to keep your anvils alive. So I think those bonuses to hit from him are going to be really nice. And then he's a 1 prayer wizard with a good prayer.
I mean, just 100-point.
Yeah.
Being a 100-point priest makes him worth it on its own.
For sure.
And then you're kind of being a cheeky Bloodmaster with the Halo of Blood, which is going to make your units fight first, which then enables them to get the 5 aboard.
Yeah, so the Bloodmaster here is in Galatian Command with the Skull Reapers. And so the Bloodmaster, having always strikes first from Halo of Blood, means that he can then chain in, if they are close enough, which they will be, you'll position them. He can chain in the Skull Reapers so that they are also fighting in the strike first phase. And so since they're fighting in the strike first phase, the Flayed is then going to kick on the 5 aboard for them, even on your opponent's turn when they come into them. And that's really going to be key to keep them alive, so that then they can potentially benefit from the 4-up rally from the Bloodsecrator. I think that's a really interesting combination. I think it's always great when you can take a unit and move them into the always strikes first, but especially in the Flayed, you get that double benefit, the double dip on defensive benefit and offensive benefit.
Claws of Karanak. Mm-hmm. I don't see it very often. Why do you have it here?
Claws of Karanak, I love, right? They are 20 points more expensive than Blood Reavers, but they have a better melee profile, especially if they are near a Fleshhound. And this unit also has a unit of this list has a unit of Fleshhounds, and it has 1 Fleshhound from Magor's Fiends, which also triggers this. So that gives them +1 to hit, or they can get +1 to hit from the Realmgore Ritualist.
Sure.
And they've got Native Rend. They are just slightly better Blood Reavers, in my opinion. But then they also have a pregame move. So they can do what Untamed Beasts do.
Sure.
And Untamed Beasts are amazing. Claws of Karanak are just better at it. So them being able to kick out on an objective early, or kick out their screen early, or have a threat range out to the perimeter early, I think makes them an awesome inclusion. They are a Warcry warband that I think really deserves a spot in Age of Sigmar. The fact that they're unconditional battle line is really interesting too.
I've always enjoyed bringing Magor's Fiends and Riptooth, but I always want a blood sacrifice Riptooth.
You are terrible to that poor dog.
Yeah, I always want him to become that 3/2 blood tithe. If you can manage to kill him right away, is always a sexy little thing to start your list with.
Well, starting with 2 blood tithe is just, I mean, it's the best.
Yeah.
Right. But you've also got 10 Blood Reavers here. You've got Magor's Fiends, like you mentioned, and they got a little bit of a glow up on the non-doggo side as well. 5 Wrathmongers for a bubble of +1 attacks. I like to see them sitting behind that unit of Skull Reapers.
Yep.
Right. 1 layer behind. And
the Skull Crushers, which you're going to bring in always, they're going to be a pinning unit, and they are pretty self-sufficient on their own. They're going to get a reroll to charge from the Bloodsecrator.
Yep. They're going to be at run and charge.
Yep, and so they can go in, be on a 2-up, probably pick a non-monster, so you can consistently give them all defense to whatever they're going into, and just be a real thorn in the side of whatever they're dealing with. And then the hammer, 10 Skull Reapers, which, so Each Skull Reaper natively has 3 or 4 attacks.
4 attacks.
4 attacks.
The Blood Secretor once per game is going to kick them to 5 attacks. There's
Wrathmongers, if they stay in the bubble, will get them to 6 each.
Yep. So a unit of 10 is potentially on 50 or 60 attacks, doing mortals on 6s in addition, typically on 2s and 3s because you're going to have your bonuses to hit. And then you also get what am I trying to say? You get them in the Always Strikes First. So the thing that comes into them is going to be decimated before it gets to swing into them. They're rallying on 4s once they get hurt. I like them as a potential hammer. They don't have the speed to be a scalpel, though.
Yeah.
Right. You're often going to, especially in this battle pack, you're often going to have to plonk them on an objective and expect that they survive.
Yep. Which, as we've mentioned, Khorne does that well, and a 4-up rally just makes you survive well in its own.
The 5-up ward from the Flayed here, I think, is really important for them, and that's why I'm investing in that Bloodmaster with the Halo of Blood, the extra artifact, to try to get that 5-up ward in my opponent's turn.
So you're a bunch of drops.
Mm-hmm.
You're running,
7 drops, yeah.
Yeah. So you likely won't get to dictate. If someone would give you first turn, what's your first turn going to look like?
So, going to throw all the prayers. The Bronze Flesh is missing here on the Bloodmaster. He's a priest. He's going to have Bronze Flesh +1 to save. So, going to pop off as many prayers as possible. Also missing from this list is the Bleeding Icon, which fits into these points. That's part of the 1980. I just forgot to mark it down here. So, Bleeding Icon, going to try to get that off, and then do all of the buffs I can onto the Mighty Skull Crushers. So that's going to be Run and Charge. That's going to be 1 extra Rend.
Bronze Flesh.
Bronze Flesh. And then I'm going to throw them across the table as far as they can go into my opponent, pin in as much as I can with 30 wounds on what will hopefully be a 1-up save, all-out defensing.
Yep.
My opponent is going to have to wade through that. Potentially going to take a full turn of attacks into them. It's either going to take their entire army committing to it, and that may not do it, right? There are very few armies that are just going to be able to clean that.
And when we were previously discussing, and I think we kind of have glossed over how important the Bleeding Icon is to just all your Khorne armies. Do you want to look up quick, just so we can get the exact rules text? But essentially, I think the Bleeding Icon is prayed for on a 3.
Yep. Which is re-rollable as long as you've got your Slaughter Priest, in this case, garrisoning your Blood Altar.
It prevents Inspiring Presence being used for all units within... I'm not seeing the actual range.
Sure. Yeah. So it goes out, it goes out, I think, 16 inches, but the altar lets you double the range. So it's going to kick out as far as you need, and then it's an 8-inch bubble, shuts off Inspiring Presence, and then if a unit flees, a non-Blades of Khorne unit flees, they are going to lose an additional
You'll roll dice.
An additional D3 units on a 1 through 5.
Yep.
On a 6, they're going to lose an extra D6 models out of the unit when they run. And then the icon will go away if you hit that 6. But even an extra D3 and shutting off Inspiring Presence is really going to turn up your damage on a lot of these things.
So it we're saying there's not a great hammer. This all of a sudden kind of serves as a hammer in itself, as long as you're spreading out your damage a little bit and forcing battle shocks around the table.
The extra rend is really important on the Skull Crushers. They have some native rend now, and they've got really good impact hits. So this unit of 6 will typically average 7 mortal wounds on the impact hits. That's really nice. But their ability to really sustain in combat is going to be contingent on the extra rend from Unholy Flames, and then getting some extra kills from these battle shock tests.
For sure. When I look at this list, just talking out loud, compared to the Slaanesh list, if I was going to a tournament, I think I would rather... No, I think the Slaanesh list might be more techy, but I think power level-wise, where do you think this list compares to like the Slaanesh list? Would you put them at the same power level, or would you think that right off the bat...
I think the Slaanesh list would beat this list, but I think that this list would beat more things in the meta than the Slaanesh list.
Sure.
I think that this has much better play into Lumineth castles. I think it has much better play into Gits with the bleeding icon really kicking some things off. I think this has much better play into Tzeentch, certainly. That top of that MetaWatch article that we talked about a little bit ago, this is better into those things than that Slaanesh list. But I think the Slaanesh list probably beats this straight up.
Right, and it's a good. It's another like rock paper scissors place to be with the meta again, where you have lists that can beat specific items or specific armies, and then they can get countered. So I think it's a nice place to be, and I think this list looks fun. And look at all of these different units that are listed in here.
And they all have a spot. They all have an important role in this list.
Yeah. There's nothing that's just brought because it looks cool.
Right. Well, the Claws Karanak look cool, but they're also really good. I think that when we look at what an army like this can do, I think that they can really shift other armies away from what their normal course of operations. Against Teclis, they cannot afford to Storm a Searing White Light you once you've gotten 5 Blood Tithe. And you can get to 5 Blood Tithe relatively quickly, right? Probably after one of their turns, you're at 5 Blood Tithe.
Yeah.
So then you're on a 4-up save getting extra Blood Tithe on your Spell Ignores. You can get to another 5, go to 3-up. They can't Storm a Searing White Light you. That means that the damage that's coming in is restricted to just what the Sentinels are putting out. And you're not having the problem of all your heroes getting rinsed out, which is typically the problem against your Teclis list.
And as mentioned, a Bloodsecrator rallying on 4-ups is protection against Sentinel shooting. I mean, they can knock out 10 of your, or 5 of your Skull Reapers, but 2.5 of those, that half is going to be extremely effective.
Right.
Well, and you look at the 2 books that we looked at have heroes, champions that are really integral pieces to making them work, like what we were talking about with the Slaanesh, the Contorted Epitome.
Yeah.
And then this with a Bloodsecrator. Do you see shooting? I mean, it seems like the 1-drop is just always going to be kind of king after the last GHD.
Yeah.
But do you see shooting armies going to, hey, we want to be able to target champions, let's bring that other, I can't remember what it's called, but the other...
Sharpshooters.
Yeah, sharpshooters.
Yes, except for Lumineth. So I think Lumineth is absolutely, it's a crutch that they need to go first and get up their buffs.
Yeah.
So I think Lumineth can never really push away from that, at least in conventional builds. But I think KO is always going to have sharpshooters, or almost always going to have sharpshooters. I think Stormcast shooting lists are now going to be running sharpshooters, and I think it's really Gits that pushed them there, and this is going to further that push, right? But yes, I think sharpshooters is going to become more of a presence in the meta than it has been.
And great, because I hate thinking about how I need to get my drops down further and further. It would be nice to run a 5-drop list.
Sharpshooters becoming part of the meta means that your 3-drop list is suddenly getting to choose priority, which is great.
Yeah.
You have to pick 3 units for sharpshooters.
Yep.
Right?
So that puts you in a minimum of 4.
So am I hearing that we think that this book is sitting right in the fat middle again?
Upper middle.
I think that this book will probably settle in at a similar win rate to Slaanesh, maybe a little bit better. But unlike that one, I mentioned that one's not really going to shift the meta. I think that this one could. I think if Khorne is extremely popular. There's a lot of people that have Khorne, right? Same as when the Night Hunt book came out. When the Night Hunt book came out, everybody had it, and so we saw it everywhere for a while. I think this Khorne book could have a lot of that same thing, where everybody's sitting on Khorne, especially Bloodbound, and this comes out, and I think we could see a lot of it flooding into the meta. And when you have to respond to that, you have to really start to think hard about taking some of those things that are weak against this.
I would love to see, with the meta watch, at the same time, what sample sizes they're using for these armies, because because Khorne is good against the top three of the top 4 armies, but if those armies aren't taken all that often, how good is it against that the chewy fat?
Yeah.
You can see an abstraction of the sample size in the plus minus.
Yeah.
The high variance where you see bone splitters at plus or minus 11%. That's a small sample size. When you see Lumineth at plus or minus 3%, that's a big sample size. Right. I guess my last thought about Khorne right now is that Reapers of Vengeance, when I played it before, I always felt advantaged and very strong against melee armies.
Sure.
And I always felt very poor against shooting and magic armies. This book, I feel a lot worse in some of those melee matchups. I don't want to play against Slaves to Darkness with this sort of list the way I wanted to before. But in what were terrible matchups before, I feel really good now.
Yeah. That's a really fair point. It's again playing against type a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Blood for the blood god, kill, kill, kill type thing. This is more a subtle, we're going to angle against what he hates in Magic. We're going to get.
He's punishing the people who aren't fighting the way he wants them to fight.
And there's definitely going to be stuff that dies once you get into melee, so it should work out. No, I'm actually excited to play this book just for the fact that it's so different, it's playing differently than the last book did. And Bloodbound are awesome models, and it's going to be fun to get them out.
For sure.
All right, so 2 great new books to add to the meta. We'll probably come back when the 2 death books get released in a month or so. You're going to Adepticon this weekend.
Yeah.
By the time people see this, you'll be there.
I've been at Adepticon. I already know my results by the time you see this.
And you made all the new
it's
friends.
Crazy
Yes.
that you did this. Who knows?
But I'm super excited to go to Adepticon. Hopefully, I met some of you down there. But anytime we're at a tournament, please come up and let us know if you watch the channel, you get anything out of it. That's really rewarding for us.
Even if they don't, I do, because I just listen to you guys talk about you guys are so much more versed in, especially the chaos side of.
I love
the
chaos.
Game. Yeah, I have like 3 order armies and just started Nurgle, so I'm
I'm
getting
in.
it. Listen,
you're getting
dipping a toe.
Their chaos.
And if you're going to dip a toe into anything, it should be Nurgle.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we did it again. We fooled them again.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, where are they going to find our link to the Discord?
Is somewhere down here.
Yeah. And we appreciate any feedback you have. Thanks for sticking with us this long if you've made it all the way to the end of the video.
If you find this valuable, please like and subscribe. Please join our conversation in the Discord like Justin mentioned. And if you want to contribute to the channel, help us improve our microphones, our cameras. We desperately need some improvements on our setup in general. But if you want to help us out, we've got our Patreon link below as well. There's a couple different levels. You can get early access to our videos. You can get sneak peeks to what we're going to be discussing. And you can even help decide what our battle reports are going to have and what our topics are going to be, and get in on that conversation in our Discord on our Patreon. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.